Hey, everybody. Welcome to Week's End.
Yeah, welcome.
So,
What's going on,
Graham,
Ryan?
man, this has been one of those weeks.
Yeah, that's
And
certainly true.
I we want to make this show personal. We really are trying to share our experience, and what we look at this as is this is us. This is some of the stuff we geek out about, but sometimes the shows are going to have a more serious topic. And I think this week it's going to be one of those, but it's important, and I think it's a really neat conversation that we're going to have. But first, I wanted to just shine a light back on briefly on the show that we did last week, and just point out that
It's a good one.
First I should say this is a photo from Charlotte. They started doing street art, or street on the art. That's wrong. Art
on the street. There you go.
So art on the street for the protest. The same thing has been happening in Raleigh. So that, it continues to progress every day. The protests all week here have been peaceful. There's been a lot of, I think, positive developments this week. So we just wanted to call attention and really give a shout out to all the artists that we showcased last week. And we had some really neat and not just neat, important, I think, expressions of art that are a part of this.
So, it was good. There was a lot of stuff in there that was it was more than caught our attention. It was moving us. So if you get a chance and you just want to see some inspirational stuff, go back and take a look at that. So
yeah,
glad we called that out.
It makes sense. So we're going to talk about some of our. We always do. The point of this show is to talk about some of our personal projects as well. And so I wanted to, I guess, I think we should start with maybe you explaining what you've been doing in research, or your research project.
Sure.
And just tell me which of these pages you want me to show first.
So why don't you start off with the one that says Lost Tacodians homepage, the first link that I gave you there. And so for those of you who don't know me, I do a lot of volunteer work outside of my job and family and everything. And one of the roles that I have is vice president and historian of the Dakota YMCA in southern New Hampshire. And we have a summer camp there that's been there for, over 100 years. And there's a building there that has a plaque in it. The building's called Memorial Lodge. And in that lodge is a beautiful brass plaque that was put in on July the 28th, 1946. And it honors 12 young men that went to our camp. And all 12 of them made the supreme sacrifice and died in the Second World War. And as historian, I took on the challenge of tracking all of them down, tracking their full stories. So Ryan, just keep scrolling. Track their full stories, their families, and wrote biographies for all of them. I had a research partner who's actually the nephew of one of these young men. And we'll put the link in so that you can read this whole thing. But if you keep scrolling, Ryan, you'll get to the point where you actually start to see the pictures of the 12 men. So what we're scrolling past now, Ryan, what you're seeing here is we're sort of setting the stage and talking about the building and what was happening in the world at that time and why and where did these men go. And if you keep going, you'll actually start to see their pictures. Here they are. So all of these men we show when they were born, when they were at our summer camp, and when they died. And Ryan, go ahead and click on Raymond Krebs, for example. And then each one of these guys has his own complete page with his own story that starts from when they were born and just keeps going and going and going and going and going and goes through everything they experienced. And Raymond's story is exceptionally powerful. He served on board a battleship called the South Dakota, which was caught up in one of the most epic naval battles of all time. But what was interesting about this project was, first of all, I'd never done anything like it. I had no idea how to do what I was doing. I literally just started with a brass plaque and a bunch of names. I went into our archives and discovered when they were in camp, and then it just unfolded from there. And we worked with agencies in the United States, United Kingdom, France, India. We worked with the Army, the Marines, the Navy, the Air Force. We worked with the National Archives and Records Administration. We worked with the families themselves. It was about a year and a half project, and we uncovered everything. And what was surprising, Ryan, is that I thought I was going to find, this guy got malaria, this guy died in training. I didn't know what I was going to find. What surprised me is that I discovered 12 incredible stories of heroism and heartbreak. All of these stories are compelling. All of these stories have really fascinating angles to them. And I want to encourage people to go into them. Actually, the shirt I'm wearing today represents these 12 stars, represent those boys. And you can actually see on the back of the shirt, I've got their names. So what was incredible here wasn't just the discovery of the men, but learning the process, learning how to discover, people that have been gone for over 70 years. And now we've built up an enormous archives of physical assets. In fact, there's a big box of them right here at my feet, a huge digital archive. We've even visited 7 of the graves, five of the graves. The other 7 are around the world. And the work goes on. We continue to get new assets and new information coming in from the National Archives. But take the time, and check out these stories. They're all pretty compelling. You don't have to know the summer camp in order to, understand these stories. And the last thing I'll say that's remarkable is, these guys knew each other. We know 6 of them were in the summer camp in 1936. They were there at the same time. George Frederick Toomey, for example, Ryan, if you click that one, I actually have the flag. I'm holding it now in my hands. I actually have the flag that was presented to his family when they discovered he had died. And this is the actual flag that was presented to the family. We actually flew this at my summer camp last year in honor to George when we assembled the families. But we've got some incredible assets here, and it's been a real journey. And my understanding, Ryan, is you've got a journey of your own. It's time for us to start taking a look at. Why don't you tell me a little bit about that?
I know just from talking with you, this journey you've been on to compile the stories. And honestly, I mean, you could tell that you've written books and books, and you've been translating information from after action reports and all the other documents that are part of they're a part of history, but they're sort of these are lost stories as well. And you've reconnected lots of families with parts of their family story that they were not either aware of or didn't have access to, which I think is amazing.
That's exactly right. In fact, we did briefings for many of the families that had no idea what had happened to these relatives. We helped some of the families to understand and recover artifacts that they had. Like one family, for example, had this trumpet hanging on their wall in their summer cabin up in New Hampshire. They just thought it was some relative's trumpet from, I think they thought it was their father or grandfather's or something. It turns out it was actually the trumpet that was taken to combat in France and ended up being shipped home. They had no idea. We were able to authenticate that. We reassembled the families at the summer camp. And it was really great because one of the families I worked with, a gentleman named Frederick Allen Stearns, who was actually executed at the end of the war in Japan. A really just incredible story. His nephew was my research partner. His nephew, Dr. Timothy Lang Francis, who holds a PhD as a historian and is also in the United States Navy. He was my research partner, but I had to track him down too. So it was like an investigation. And what I want to encourage people is read the stories because they're interesting, but also read the stories to realize what you can discover. So if you have a relative who served, whether it was in combat in war or not, or Vietnam or Korea or Afghanistan, or just somebody that served, maybe they never even were deployed in combat, but it was your grandfather who's passed away and you want to learn more, your grandmother, do the research because their story is out there. And you got to connect a lot of dots, and there will be roads you go down that are wrong, and then you got to back up and start again. But it's extraordinarily fulfilling work, and I just want to encourage people to do that. So
I've been in awe.
I'll share the link to that project on my Twitter feed a little later, but fascinating.
So everybody, if you want to connect, I guess Twitter is probably the best way to connect with Graeme on this subject. So yeah, you're right about my story. So I have two grandfathers that served in World War II. Wow. They both were active duty. They were both, I think, so I had a story that I've been telling for years and years, partly because I thought it was just, I thought it was a story that was really, I hate to say it, it was almost like your party icebreaker story about your family that I used to tell, but I had it wrong. What I discovered was I had mixed the service record and the story of my two grandfathers together, and didn't have a lot of the details. So the story I had been telling for the last 20 years was that I thought that my paternal grandfather, Grandpa Boyles, had gone on the beach, Normandy, D-Day +1. I thought he was a truck driver or a maintenance technician of some kind. He came down with appendicitis, so I thought, and had a emergency field surgery in a tent on the beach, or on the wherever they in the muck, right? Yep. And I thought the story went that he was sent home, and so my interpretation was that there would be no Boyles family line potentially if he had given the ultimate sacrifice and not had that experience and came home. Sure. What I found out from talking, so I had a long conversation with my father over the last weekend, and my grandfather's he's not been with us for a few years. He died of complications of diabetes, but he lived a long life. But he, like many of those from that generation, really kept their mouth shut. I mean, he did not talk about the war, but what he did tell me,
very common, by the way.
What he told my father, he only opened up to my father a couple of times, is my understanding, and they were at key moments. One was sort of at a moment when my father was trying to make a decision. My father was trying to make a decision of going to Vietnam or going to college, that's a tricky decision, right? For anybody. And there's a lot of emotion behind that as well. But everyone was going to be drafted at that point. And my father was already in the service, right? So he was going no matter what. But one of the things my grandfather told him at that time, that's when he opened up and told him some of the stories of what happened. And so it was really eye-opening that he said, go for the right reasons and don't go just because. And I don't know how to interpret that. I don't know if those were his exact words, but it was along the lines of, he opened up about some horrible things. He lost a lot of friends in France and in Belgium. So this is the part of this. I want to recap the real story now. That was the story I thought I knew. What my father said was that Pearl Harbor, of course, was what woke up the giant, or however that saying goes, right? It opened up everything.
A sleeping giant.
A sleeping giant, right? And so I liken it to many people who felt patriotic or felt it was their duty to sign up after 9/11, and in the younger generation that we're a part of, is he signed up right then, like the next month he was on a train to go to training. Oh, yeah. Right. And so he signed
that
up.
Story a lot too, let me tell you.
And
the call was extremely powerful.
Right.
The call to go.
And
not by the way, not just in the families or in the person, but in the society, in the news, in responsibility. I mean, it was everywhere. And I saw that with a lot of the boys that I researched, is the call, and they made these decisions with girlfriends and wives and mothers and fathers. They weren't just like, forget it, I'm going. I think we only found one of those, but right. Most of the stories were, I have to go. have to. I'm compelled. I must get in this.
Yeah.
And they did.
Yeah. And so for him, he signs up, he gets shipped off to do the training here in the U.S. And I don't have my notes with me right this moment, but you go through training here, and it takes a while, right? He was in training was months and months and months and months, and then when he shipped out, they went to stage and do more training for Operation Overlord in England.
Oh yeah.
So he was in. So this is what he was telling my father, is that he was in a 2-man pump tent in a field in England for an entire year. And that, he said it was he described it as the coldest he had ever been in his life. That was,
wow.
Man of few words, but then they were getting ready for the invasion, or for the, to go back and go into France. So he goes into France, not D-Day +1, I think 10 days or 12 days. But he's been trained to be a communications officer, to run the lines, dig the ditches, and then be the communications officer. So his job was, on the front line, and it was dangerous, right? Because he was right there with the front line, running it. And so his whole experience is laying the wire, doing the communications for the front line for another 1.5 years. So he went all the way from Normandy Beach, and I don't know which beach. He went all the way inland, all the way. He was in the Battle of the Bulge. He ended up in, it's called Marion Garden, or there's some
Market Garden.
Market Garden. He ended up at Market Garden in Belgium.
Yep.
And so
Market Garden, I think, was I'm not sure that was Belgium. Let me check that out.
I need my notes, obviously. So this is where you come in. I have a bunch of chicken scratch about.
Market Garden was Netherlands. That's right. I didn't want to say it before I was sure, but it's possible that that's just been confused. We see a lot of that where people are like, "Oh, I think this person was here, and they had the job right, but the location wrong, or the location wrong and the job right, or it wasn't Market Garden, it was something else that sounded like it." So that's very common.
Right. So I don't have all the facts straight still, but it tells me more about what he did there, about the risk, about the sacrifice. It also tells me that one of the stories that he told on his, in another moment, which he never shared with his wife or anyone, with my grandmother, is that there was a night where his job was also to take a 2-hour shift, guard duty. And so one night, and he doesn't even remember why. I think this was one of those traumatic moments of, he doesn't know why it happened, but he swapped shifts with a good friend. His friend was shot that night and died. So, I mean, there's just moments like that are, I mean, war is, right? I mean, you don't know what happened from
We've
one
seen
moment.
moments like that, and we've seen moments like that on an individual scale like that. We've seen moments on a grand scale where, like, one ship was knocked out, so the other ship took its place, and then the ship that took its place was the one that was sunk. We've seen stuff like that too. We what I'd like to understand is, where did your dad get these stories, right? Because it sounds to me like somebody pulled his official military personnel file, or his individual deceased personnel file. So it's either an OMPF or an IDPF, could be a DD-214, but somewhere in there, someone's got the records. Or is it just your father knows because that's what his father told him?
Yeah, I don't know those details. This was something we literally were talking about last Sunday, because I wanted to post a memorial update, and I've been asking my father. My father's got artifacts and things from that time that were passed on to him, and they've been in storage. They've been sealed. I haven't seen them, so I've got a couple of pictures to show here. He was given the medal.
Wow.
The medals and I don't know if this is that medal, but I know one of the medals was for helping liberate France. There was a French liberation medal for everyone who went into Normandy and cleared that path, right? And there were others, and these are his bars. I have no idea what they mean. There's also a couple other photos I want to show you. I'm going to scroll here. I just put these on Twitter. So here was the other story, and this part of what I got confused with before was that I knew that he came home from the service and married my grandmother. They were dating when he signed up, and then he went over. And so she was waiting at home. They weren't married yet. So this is what happened when Germany fell, when Germany surrendered or fell, he was given a 30-day leave and came home, and he married my grandmother. And then they were waiting for orders he was going to be sent to the Pacific Theater.
Yep.
And so in the progress of getting ready for that, I guess he had taken a train, and
I can see the likeness, buddy, by the way.
Yeah. I like this.
Yeah.
They were staging in California to go over wherever it was they were headed, and I don't know where they were headed. But then they dropped the first bomb, and Japan was still, at the time they weren't going to give up, and then we dropped the second bomb, and it was over. So he never went back out.
Got it.
And then the second photo I have is this is the nice one, right? This is came home and started a life. And this is my father that he's holding.
Wow. Sure. Wow.
And his older sister, which is my aunt, whose name is Peggy. And special shout out to her. She's battling cancer for her life right now.
Oh boy.
Lives in Charleston. So both of my grandparents have passed on now. But Posey Garvine Boyles, they called him PG.
Can I show you something?
Sure, go for it. Oh wow. There we go.
This is his registration card into the United States Army. You can see it has his name, where he lived, his order number. If we go to the back, we will see his signature. Actually, unusual that it's not there, but it looks like he was 5'10", 132 pounds. He registered in Stokes, North Carolina on October the 16th, 1940 at local board number 1.
Yep. Yeah, so anybody who knows the Boyles name here in North Carolina knows that. So when you go to the front of the card and it shows King, the family sort of homestead.
Whoops, looks like I got off this one. Hold on 1 second.
The family homestead is in King. And so I've driven through there with my father and with my boys, several years ago, and looked at all the headstones for the Boyles family. They're there. They're everywhere. And so they were tobacco farmers.
Yeah, it says that on his card. If you look, it says, let me bring that back up. I'm just seeing if anything else jumps out at me here. He's actually got quite a bit of, we know he's full enlistment records are there too, which is great. It actually says farming for self. Right.
So I'm sure that was part of the family. My earliest memory is actually I did meet and spend time with my great grandfather who owned the farm there in King. When after the war, I don't know the timeline, but I know that he went into insurance as a self-employed agent, his own company, and he also ran a store of some kind, because my earliest memory is of him bringing me a brown paper bag full of candy. And, he was the grandparent that would spoil the heck out of you, and not, despite, you get all the purple soda you want when you come over and that kind of thing.
Purple soda. Let me share something else with you.
Thank you so much. That's like,
I downloaded them. I'm going to send them to you. But what I want to show you is the amount of information that is accessible. So I'm going to share something else here. Okay. What I'm about to show you, Ryan, is where the journey starts. So this is the National Archives and Records Administration in St. Louis. Now, obviously, things are a little dicey right now because of COVID-19, but this is where it all starts. So I'll put the link in the chat for this, Ryan, and you can go ahead and we can share this as well. But if you have a relative who served in the military, you can request their records. And what you want to request is an official military personnel file, the OMPF. And these documents, in fact, I have some of them at in this box that's in my office here. I have some of them digital. These are huge files that you can get that basically say everything the military has about a person. And I mean everything. They are massive files. And so you can start the request. Ryan, what you would have to do is download. Well, you will not be making an EVET request. Actually, looks like they may have taken it down for now. Nope, this is it. So it's called a standard form 180, an SF 180, and you download the form here, and you just follow the instructions. You give them whatever information you have, first name, last name, any dates or information you have, where you think they may have served, what you think they might have done, any details you have. You send it into the address, and then you just wait. And then under normal circumstances, maybe not right now, but under normal circumstances, a few weeks later, you get a letter, and it either tells you that they have found the records, and here's how you can request them, and you can get them mailed to you. Some of them I have physically, and they're these big boxes that come in, or you get them digitally, in which case they send you a link to download a gigantic PDF. And they'll tell you if either they found them or they haven't. Now, if they haven't, it's because there was a fire at the National Archives in the 1970s that burned an enormous amount of records from the military. And so they may have been destroyed. They may also have been what's called put in the burn room, where they kind of partially reconstruct them. So one of the records I have is a burn room record, and it's literally photographs of like a burned document that they've partially reconstructed like a puzzle. It's remarkable.
Wow.
But if they can't find the OMPF, they may be able to find the IDPF, which is the individual deceased personnel file, which means if that person was killed in combat or killed in service, they'll have another record. Those records were stored elsewhere, and they can help with that. Now, your grandfather died later, so you should just check to see if they have his OMPF or DD-214, and I can walk you through the process. But for anybody who wants to request military records, this is where it starts. Right now, you're going to have to wait longer, is my guess. But honestly, we're still getting records. I mean, we just in the past couple of weeks, we received 2 individual deceased personnel files. One for a young man that was killed in a submarine, another for a young man that was killed in combat in Italy. And these things answer a lot of questions, but they also start more questions. And you have to learn the language and filter through them, and then use clues, and then say, okay, I know he was in this division. So you go look for those reports, those after action reports, or those divisional histories, and then you start to put the whole picture together. But if you literally Google NARA request military records, it will bring you to that page, and you just follow those instructions, and then you can literally you can learn everything. It's remarkable what the National Archives, United States National Archives, has saved for these heroes, Ryan. It's remarkable.
It's so important. And
very important.
There's no real awareness of this, I think, but it's a crucial service, and appreciate your help. I'm curious, when you did all your research, I know you were burning the midnight oil. You were doing this, in your ample free time, as they say, and obviously driven to serve your camp community and the folks that are a part of it. But when you look at one of those amazingly detailed, almost like biographical stories that you've written on your website, on the camp website, how many of, I mean, not all of that comes from one of these forms. How many different pieces of things are you using to piece together like a whole narrative of their story like that?
Sure. So for each person, at a minimum, we had dozens of pages and interviews. And like a couple of the guys died in aircraft accidents, so we actually pulled the aircraft accident reports. And on the other extreme of that, we had thousands of pages and multiple interviews and tons of photographs and letters home and physical assets. And I mean, some of these guys, like, man, it was a real investigation to figure out what happened to them, right? Like one guy we knew died in a plane accident, but we just couldn't find it no matter what we did. Turns out he died on board a Royal Air Force flight in the middle of nowhere in India. And until we pulled his IDPF and realized it was a UK flight, there was no way to figure it out. Then we were able to do the research and it was like, bing, lights went off and we found it. But I mean, a lot of these stories, and there's hundreds of pages that we've written, I mean, it took a huge effort across a lot of people. It's not just me or just Tim, my research partner, but it took a lot of effort. So what the point to that, and that's a great question, Ryan, because we want people to understand these kinds of research projects, like if you're going to do it, you have to realize what you're getting into. You have to make a decision that you're all in, because the danger is if you just go partially in and pull a couple of things, you could come to some conclusions that are wrong, and those conclusions could be pervasive throughout your family's history. So like you got to get the right story, then you have to document the right story, then you have to share the right story to make sure that you're telling the right history. So for example, we wouldn't publish anything until we had checked it 3 times, verified it with the family, got it cleared by the military, then we went out and published our stories. So we didn't just like write a bunch of stuff and put it out there, right? We were very, very careful in how we proceeded.
And I think that's key. That's exactly what I experienced with my story, is that I haven't mentioned my other grandfather. He also was over there. He was like some kind of maintenance or truck driver or something. He is actually the one that went over D-Day +1. He fell off a truck and broke his back and he got sent home. So he was the one that actually had the injury the story goes, but I know nothing else about his story. I only know my father only corrected me on sort of the weird way I had mixed the stories as a child, I guess. And my grandfather, which we spoke about earlier, my Posey Garvine PG, he was there the entire length of the war, but he did have appendicitis. He did have surgery in the field. He did not come home. He continued to serve. That blows my mind. Yeah. I mean, when you talk about just, I don't know, it just it's really amazing to me. So I appreciate your help. I know we're going to talk about this more offline. I think it was
happy to help. Let's do it.
What you're doing. I know you're doing more of these, of course, and you're also trying to develop this into. I think you've been talking about developing this into something bigger as well, right?
Correct. So right now we are working to find a non-fictional literary agent who specializes in nonfiction history. So we're working to get an agent who can help take a look at the project and say, okay, you guys have something here. This is what we think you should develop it into. We've also thought about talking to PBS or American Experience or National Geographic or something like that, right? And putting together a documentary series. All of these things are super tricky. All of these things are easily rejected, and it's really, really hard. So the phase 2, as we call it, of this project is a long time in the making, but we're in it for the long haul. And the reason for that is there's been a billion World War II stories told, right? No big deal. There's nothing in our stories that are earth-shattering. what's incredible and different about our story is the fact that these boys knew each other. There's a unique aspect of them all going to the same camp. We have an enormous amount of their artifacts. Some of the stories are absolutely mind-boggling combat and heartbreak and just incredible stuff, right? So what we have in its individuality is not necessarily unique, but as a whole, we believe it is. So we are actively looking for a literary agent or a documentary organization that wants to take a look at this to say, yeah, I think you got something here. Let's turn it into something that is warrant or deserving of a larger audience beyond your camp's community and the families in which you help to reunite.
That's awesome. Well, I wish you the best of luck on that project. I think if you've got my vote. So amazing stuff. And continue doing that job. I think we should sort of wrap up. This has been a lot.
Yeah.
For me, I wanted to, so my shout out, not just with those photos, which I'm discovering more photos and trying to dig those out. His Posey's sister is named Piney. She's 96 and she's still
great
alive.
Names.
So they named them after trees, I guess, or trees and flowers. So imagine a man in the 40s going to war with the name Posey.
Yeah.
And yet,
now you said Piney's still alive?
Piney's still alive. She lived.
She, like, with it? I mean, I hate not to put it that way, but is she?
She had an accident and she was in her home up until a couple of years ago. In her house.
I mean, my suggestion to you, Ryan, is get to her as fast as possible and get as much information, anything about Posey that you can.
Right.
And any little detail, anything she may have, anything she can share, any little detail, because we found that the interviews with the families significantly advanced every search we made, even though some of it was not helpful. Well, that's not the right term. Even though some of it was not relevant.
Sure.
All of it was helpful because it helped us paint the bigger picture. I mean, even like high school yearbooks and stuff.
Yeah. So I had some props. I have very few things actually from my grandfather. I have some furniture. He did woodwork late in life, and I have a couple of pieces of things he made. Because one thing you know how people used to do they used to make like a pie safe, and they would hammer a pattern in the metal.
Yes.
He used to do that kind of stuff. And he had me as a child draw a bird for him. I didn't know why. And that piece of furniture, I have that now.
That's wonderful.
This is the thing, though, that you've probably seen me wear this. Maybe.
I have.
This is his Stetson. Legit leather. And guess what? It fits my head like a glove. And I got a big noggin.
Hey, you want to see something?
It's amazing. Yeah, go for it.
Remember that guy, Frederick Allen Stearns, I told you about, the aviator that was executed at the end of the war?
Yep.
That's his hat.
Wow.
Let's see if I can get that in the camera. This is his flight cap.
That's amazing.
No, it wouldn't fit my head. Probably fits his nephew.
Right.
That's his hat, man. These assets are so important. And it's great that you wear it, and it's great that you have it, and it's great that but the point that I want to make about that is, remember what I told you about the trumpet? This family had this raggedy old trumpet around. They had no idea what it was. Nobody really cared about it. Now it's like a item of intense honor in the family. Make sure somebody knows what that Stetson is, because while you wear it and you love it, and I want to encourage you to do that, you should use it. It's a great thing. But make sure your kids know, like, hey, this is your great-grandfather's Stetson. He served in the war, because someday somebody may not know what that is. And these stories and these assets, if they get lost to history, there's no coming back from that. So make sure somebody knows. You know what I mean? Is that,
You're right.
You know what I'm saying?
The thing is that everybody who's still alive right now from that era, like my great aunt, who's 96, and she's having trouble getting around, but she's still mentally there. It's like many of those people are disappearing quickly. I mean, to be frank, the amount of people who served or from that era, it's hard to, it's really, I don't know what words
to hard
use,
to follow, buddy. And it's important that we recognize the sacrifice these heroes made, for both those who died and didn't, right?
Yep.
But the sacrifice of the family. So one of the things that we dig into in my project is also what happened to the wives and mothers and brothers and sisters and, aunts and all. I mean, we dig into the families as well, because we often think of the guys that were in, but what about all the other people? A lot of these people had kids. I've met the kids of some of these people. Right.
Sure.
We did a ceremony at my camp last year. I sat next to one of their sons. I had my arm around him as he's crying while they played taps. I mean, it's like the ripple effect. But it's also important to remember what was happening in the world at that point. Like, for example, one of the stories was a woman whose son died in war. Her daughter died from meningitis. Her husband had died. This was a time when it was a very different world for women, right? Much like it was a very different world for African Americans, much like it was a very different world for anybody that doesn't look like us, buddy.
Yep.
And you have to factor for that as well. So one of the things that blew our minds about this story was this mother, Alice was her name, Alice Toomey's ability to not only survive all of this heartbreak and loss, but remake herself into an incredible hero for her society. I mean, she went and started a whole Gold Star Mothers Society up in Keene, New Hampshire, to help other mothers who had lost their children. I mean, in the middle of all this grief and struggle to have a life, she's turns it into action. Yeah. These are remarkable people, and we must tell and preserve their stories. So if anybody ever actually watches this whole thing, because we're pushing 40 minutes here, I'm ready to help. I'm ready to help. Right? Ryan, I'm ready to help.
That's a good thought. So I want to end it with two shout outs. One is exactly what you're saying. I found this very interesting. You and I have been talking about space on every show, it seems like, with the exception of this one that we've done so far. And here was something that the National Air and Space Museum had shared about a protest around, with parallels to today with economic inequality, set against the backdrop of everyone that was working on Apollo 11. And then I wanted to end it. I thought this is something that I've seen and I've taken to heart time and time again. And we'll share the link because I know the text is small here in the window, but it's essentially, you go back to, we have all of these heroes, and superheroes are pervasive in today's culture. And I think back to what Stan Lee and some of the other creators started in the 60s, with books. My favorite books have been Batman and X-Men. The X-Men was all about race. That's what people don't understand, is it was all about racial inequality set against the backdrop of people that had weird powers or weird color skin or could turn into a wolf or whatever, right? And so this was Stan's soapbox. It's something that he used to do in the back as the editor of some of the books. And he's talking directly to people in 1968, just like that other protest was in 68 with the folks at Apollo, but talking directly about how bigotry is just, there's no place for it, or to vilify a religion, or to, hate redheads, or, everything they did. And something else that I saw this week that I thought you would like is I don't know if it's online. There's a DVD that I dug out of my house with my father and my mother's house, with all the stuff from the 80s that they're holding on to. They don't throw anything away. There's a DVD with Kevin Smith where he's interviewing Stan Lee, and he talks about how Spider-Man's costume, accidentally, he admits, but the fact that it covers his face and his entire body enabled a child who's black, white, Indian, whatever, they all could see themselves as being Spider-Man. And he thought that was really important, because you've got all of these, you've got Captain America with his face like this, or you've got Batman, or you've got Wolverine, you've got all these really strong, and the women too, right? You don't see a lot of diversity, frankly, outside of the X-Men. But his point was Spider-Man could be anybody. And one thing that gave me chills yesterday, I was watching the PlayStation 5 reveal.
Yep.
One of the biggest games is announcing the new Spider-Man game is based on the same character from a alternate, dimension that is, it's a black
Spider-Verse. Yeah.
The Spider-Verse, right? So I was telling somebody I thought that the Spider-Verse was one of the key superhero movies of the last decade. Like, all of them are great. All of them are entertaining. But when you see the response to Into the Spider-Verse, and now the entire game is going to be about that character, I think is amazing. And I'm looking forward to it.
I do too.
So that's all I have. I know that was a lot. I know we had an extra long show today, but I appreciate you.
Man, it's therapy. It's therapeutic, right? It's good to talk about this stuff. It's good to share these stories. It's good. It's good to help people understand how to discover these stories. And this is good stuff, man.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? Salute to your grandfather, right?
Thank you so much. And salute to all those folks that you were able to write about from the camp as well. So thanks everybody for watching. Let us know if you have stories. I would love to, like, my story, like I said, I've been thinking one thing for 15, 20 years. Turns out I need to learn more about it. And I appreciate that. So if you have stories you'd like to share, please leave comments. Please drop us a line in the DMs. You know where to find us. We're on Twitter. I think we should just point everybody to Twitter, because that's where the open place right now.
Yep.
So thanks everybody. Thanks, Graeme. It's been awesome. Happy week's end. Happy Friday, and we'll see you on the next one.
Happy Friday, everybody.